Most people go through life seeing things not as they are, but as they have been taught to see them. The lens through which you view the world is not just a reflection of your reality. It is the creator of it. You believe that life is hard, full of scarcity and limitations. You will always find evidence to prove that belief right. If you believe people are untrustworthy or success is out of reach, your brain will unconsciously filter everything through that lens. And without even knowing it, you will live in a version of reality that is far smaller than what's actually available to you. That's why thinking differently doesn't start with a new plan or strategy. It starts with changing the lens through which you experience the world. Everything begins in the mind. That internal dialogue you carry, the beliefs you repeat, the thoughts you entertain, those are not harmless background noise. They are the architecture of your destiny. What you accept as true becomes the framework of what's possible. That's why two people can live in the same city, experience the same economy, and have access to the same resources. But one thrives while the other struggles. It's not luck, it's not talent. It's perspective. It's the ability to think differently, to question the mental filters, and to ask, what if there's another way to see this? When you start to understand this truth, you take back your power. You stop being a victim of circumstance and start becoming the designer of your life. And the first shift begins when you ask yourself, is this thought helping me expand or shrink? If the way you think about your job, your relationships, or your potential keeps you stuck, maybe it's time to challenge that thought. Maybe it's time to think differently, not based on what you've been told, but based on what your soul knows to be true. Most people live in patterns not because they choose to, but because they've never slowed down enough to question them. They're trapped in inherited ways of seeing things, passed down by parents, teachers, culture, media, and they never ask, is this even my belief? But what if you could hit pause on all the noise and reconnect with the truth underneath it all? What if you realized that the beliefs you've been living by were never yours to begin with? That's where transformation starts. It's not about fixing your life from the outside in. It's about shifting your perspective from the inside out. When you begin to think differently, you give yourself permission to imagine a life beyond the borders of what you've known. You stop settling. You stop repeating, you start creating. The future is not some distant place waiting to unfold. It's being built right now by the thoughts you choose to believe in this moment. So if you want a different outcome, don't just change your actions, change your mindset, ask bigger questions, entertain new possibilities, become aware of your own filters. Because once you do, you'll begin to see the world, not as it was handed to you, but as it could be. And here's the beautiful part, the moment you change your perspective, your energy shifts. You begin attracting new people, new opportunities, new levels of growth, simply because your inner world is no longer aligned with limitation. You no longer see problems as dead ends, but as signals to innovate. Stop fearing uncertainty and start welcoming it as a space for reinvention. That kind of shift is powerful. It makes you magnetic. It opens doors that were invisible before. Not because the world changed, but because you did. So the next time you feel stuck, uninspired, or lost, don't just ask what needs to change outside of you. Ask what needs to change within. Ask yourself how you've been looking at the situation and whether there's a better way to interpret it. Ask yourself if you've been operating from fear, doubt, survival, and what it would look like to think from a place of courage, faith, and expansion. You'll find that the real transformation begins when you stop reacting from the same old mental scripts and start thinking in a way that aligns with the life you actually want to live. Because when you shift your thoughts, you shift your energy. When you shift your energy, you shift your reality. And when you shift your reality, there's no limit to what you can create. So many of the barriers that hold people back are not physical, not external, and certainly not permanent. They are mental. Invisible walls built from years of fear, self-doubt, rejection, and the opinions of others. What most don't realize is that the greatest limits in life are the ones you place on yourself. The mind, if left unchallenged, becomes a prison. But once you recognize that your limitations are often nothing more than old thoughts dressed up as truth, you begin to take your power back. You begin to see that just because something feels real doesn't mean it's actually true. We've all been conditioned. From the time we're children, we're given rules to live by, not just by society, by the people closest to us, parents, teachers, peers. We're told what's possible, what's practical, and what's acceptable. We're taught to aim for what's safe, not what sets our soul on fire. And before we know it, we're not chasing our dreams, we're chasing permission. But here's the truth, the life you're capable of living is so much greater than the one you've been conditioned to accept. And that gap between who you are and who you could become, that's the space where thinking differently makes all the difference. When you believe you can't do something, your brain stops looking for ways to make it happen. It doesn't even try. But when you believe you can, even if you're not sure how, you activate a part of your mind that searches for answers, possibilities, and resources. This is not just motivational fluff, it's neuroscience. Your thoughts literally shape your awareness. They tell your subconscious mind what to focus on, what to filter, and what to dismiss. So if your internal belief is, I'm not good enough, guess what? You won't notice the opportunities that prove otherwise. You'll walk right past doors you were meant to walk through because you didn't think they were for you. This is why thinking differently is not just an option. It's a requirement. If you want to rise above the ordinary, you can't step into an extraordinary life with a limited mindset. Can't create freedom while thinking like a prisoner. The moment you accept that your mind has been operating under outdated programming, you open the door to rewrite the story. You start to see that your limitations were never the truth. They were just the story you kept telling yourself. And stories can change. It's important to understand that fear often wears the disguise of logic. It whispers things like, be realistic. That's too risky. You don't have what it takes. But who wrote those lines in the first place? Who decided what was realistic for you? Maybe it's time to stop letting old fears write your future. Because the only reason something feels impossible is because you've never done it yet. Every master was once a beginner. Every successful person was once someone who dared to believe, even when no one else did. They weren't superhuman, they simply refused to let their mind stop them. It's not about denying your challenges or pretending everything is easy. It's about refusing to be ruled by limitation. When you start thinking differently, you stop asking, can I? And start asking, how can I? That one shift moves you from helpless to resourceful. You go from a mindset of excuses to a mindset of solutions. And once your brain is trained to search for growth, for opportunity, for expansion, it becomes unstoppable. Your environment might not change right away. Your circumstances might still be difficult. But if your mindset changes, your direction changes. And when your direction changes, so does your destination. You might have been born into struggle, into doubt, into fear, but you don't have to stay there. You get to upgrade your thoughts. You get to question what you've accepted as truth. You get to think for yourself. Because the truth is, you are far more capable, far more intelligent, and far more powerful than you've ever been told. Stop waiting for someone else to lift the ceiling. Stop waiting for the world to make room for you. Make room for yourself. Lift your own ceiling by thinking higher, thinking bolder, thinking beyond the mental walls you've inherited. It all begins in the mind. Change your thoughts, and everything around you starts to follow. There's a subtle trap that many people fall into, the illusion of the comfort zone. It feels safe, familiar, predictable. It gives the impression that you're in control, that you're protecting yourself from failure, from rejection, from the unknown. But the truth is, your comfort zone is not a place of safety. It's a quiet cage that keeps you from becoming who you're meant to be. What feels secure in the moment often becomes the very thing that keeps you small. And unless you're willing to think differently about what growth really looks like, you'll end up living a life that looks acceptable on the outside, but feels unfulfilled on the inside. Thinking differently requires courage, not because it's risky, but because it often means going against what's familiar. We're creatures of habit. The brain loves patterns. It's wired to conserve energy, to avoid threats, to stay with what it knows. But what it knows isn't always what's best for you. Just because something feels familiar doesn't mean it's right. Just because a job, a routine, or a relationship feels comfortable doesn't mean it's aligned with your purpose. Sometimes thinking differently is simply the act of asking, is this still serving me? And if the answer is no, then the next step is not to retreat, but to expand, to stretch into the unknown even when it feels uncertain. The danger of staying in your comfort zone is that it tricks you into believing that progress is happening even when you're standing still. You might be busy, you might be doing the things you're used to, you might even be achieving small wins, but deep down, you know when you're coasting. You know when you've stopped growing. And growth never happens where you're comfortable. It happens when you're challenged, when you're stretched, when you're doing things that feel slightly above your current capacity. That tension you feel outside your comfort zone. That's not a sign to pull back. It's a sign you're evolving. And yet, the moment you try to step beyond it, resistance shows up. That voice in your head will say, what if I fail? What will people think? Who do you think you are? This resistance is not a stop sign. It's a signal a signal that you're on the edge of transformation. Because when you start thinking differently, when you challenge the patterns, question the rules, and break away from the expected, you become a threat to the status quo. Not just the world's status quo, your own. And that's where real power begins. You have to be willing to risk discomfort in order to experience freedom. Freedom isn't the absence of fear. It's the ability to act in spite of it. Every major breakthrough in your life will require you to think in a way you've never thought before, to do something that feels uncomfortable, to trust a version of yourself you haven't fully stepped into yet. It's not easy, but it's worth it, because what's on the other side of your comfort zone is everything you say you want. Abundance, clarity, purpose, self-respect. But you can't reach those things by staying where it's familiar. You reach them by becoming someone who is willing to grow, even when it's messy, even when it's awkward, even when it's hard. What makes comfort so dangerous is how quiet it is. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It tells you, just wait a little longer. You're not ready yet. Maybe next time. But that voice is not your truth. It's your fear. And if you don't silence it, it will quietly run your entire life. Thinking differently means no longer waiting for conditions to be perfect. It means realizing that the discomfort you feel when stepping out is not a sign that something is wrong. It's evidence that you're alive, that you're evolving, that you're stepping into who you're meant to be. So start leaning into that discomfort. Start saying yes to the things that challenge you. Start thinking like the version of yourself that isn't limited by fear, doubt, or past failure. Because the person who lives an extraordinary life is not the one who never felt afraid. It's the one who decided to think differently about fear. The one who understood that staying comfortable was never the goal, becoming whole, becoming free, becoming fulfilled. That's the real mission. And the moment you stop chasing comfort and start chasing growth, you open the door to a life far beyond anything your comfort zone could ever offer. Most people move through life operating on mental autopilot. They wake up, think the same thoughts, feel the same emotions, make the same choices, and repeat the same experiences day after day, not because they choose to live this way, because they've never learned how to step outside the programming they inherited. From a young age, we're conditioned to think in certain ways based on our upbringing, environment, culture, and the beliefs of those around us. And without realizing it, that programming becomes our personal reality. But thinking differently means interrupting that cycle. It means becoming aware of the invisible patterns guiding your thoughts and having the courage to question them. Our minds are designed to conserve energy. That's why the brain favors repetition. It builds neural pathways from repeated thoughts, making it easier to think the same thing again and again. Over time, these pathways become highways. They become your default way of interpreting the world. You've been telling yourself, I'm not smart enough, or people like me don't succeed, or money is hard to come by. Your brain has built connections that reinforce those beliefs. Not because they're true, but because they're familiar. And what's familiar feels safe, even when it's limiting. But you are not your programming. You are not your past. You are not the voice that says you can't change. You are the awareness behind those thoughts. And once you realize that, you can start choosing new ones. You can begin to rewire your brain one conscious decision at a time. It starts with awareness, slowing down enough to observe your thinking instead of blindly following it. Ask yourself, where did this thought come from? Is this belief empowering me or holding me back? Is there a better perspective I can adopt? These questions are not just reflections. They are tools for transformation. Every time you challenge your default programming, you create space for something new, a new belief, a new habit, a new level of growth. And at first, feels uncomfortable because your brain is stepping off the highway and into unfamiliar territory. That discomfort isn't a sign that something's wrong. It's a sign that you're growing. Proof that you're no longer living according to scripts written by other people. Thinking differently means becoming the author of your own mind. It means choosing your thoughts with intention rather than running the same outdated software that was installed by the world. The moment you start thinking differently, your reality begins to shift. You notice opportunities you would have missed. Handle challenges in new ways. You stop reacting out of habit and start responding out of clarity. And that's where your power lies, not in controlling the outside world, in managing your inner world. Because the most powerful transformation happens when you change the way you see, when you stop living in a recycled loop of doubt. fear, and limitation, and start choosing thoughts that align with who you truly are, it's not always easy to break free from mental patterns. Some beliefs are deeply rooted. Some thoughts feel like truth because you've repeated them for so long, but repetition works both ways. Just as you trained your brain to think in limiting ways, you can train it to think in empowering ways. Affirmations, visualization, conscious self-talk. These are not just practices, they are tools to rewire your mind. With consistency and intention, new neural pathways begin to form. And over time, the new becomes familiar, and the familiar becomes your new normal. The goal isn't perfection, it's awareness. It's not about never thinking a negative thought again. It's about noticing it, questioning it, and choosing differently. It's about rising above unconscious programming and stepping into conscious creation. You don't have to be a prisoner of your mind. You can become its master. That starts with the decision to stop running old scripts and start thinking from a place of possibility, not fear. Because when you challenge your default thinking, you unlock a new level of clarity, creativity, and confidence. You start making choices that reflect your vision, not your limitations. And from that place, you begin to build a life that's not based on what you've been through, on what you're here to become. Every challenge you face, every obstacle in your path, every so-called limitation, these are not just problems, they're invitations to think differently. The world doesn't change for those who think the same way as everyone else. It changes for those who dare to look at what everyone calls a dead end and find a hidden doorway. That's the power of innovative thinking. It's the quiet skill that turns setbacks into setups, detours into breakthroughs, and ordinary minds into extraordinary lives. When you begin to see life through a lens of creativity and possibility, opportunities appear that were invisible before. Not because they weren't there, but because your mind wasn't trained to see them. Most people are conditioned to see problems as walls, as things that stop them, delay them, or defeat them. But someone who thinks differently sees problems as puzzles, something to figure out, something to play with, something that can lead to a higher level of growth. This kind of mindset doesn't wait for life to be easy. It finds power in complexity. It asks better questions. It refuses to settle for obvious answers. And that's what sets you apart, not what you know, but how you approach the unknown. Thinking differently means you stop seeing yourself as a victim of your environment and begin to see yourself as the architect of your experience. That shift changes everything. Suddenly, you're not just reacting to life, you're shaping it. You're not waiting for a door to open, you're building a new one. You're not complaining about what you lack. You're creating something valuable with what you already have. This kind of thinking attracts opportunity because it doesn't rely on perfect conditions. It thrives in imperfection. It sees every challenge as raw material for reinvention. People often say, I don't have the resources, or I'm not in the right place, or I don't know the right people. But thinking differently breaks through all of that. It says, what can I create with what I've got? It asks, what's a new way to approach this? The most innovative thinkers in history didn't wait for things to be ideal. They moved with what was in front of them, and they did so with imagination, with persistence, with belief. And that mindset didn't just change their own lives, it reshaped industries, cultures, and the future. You see, opportunity isn't something you stumble into. It's something you recognize because you've trained your mind to see beyond limitation. The more you think differently, the more your perception expands. You begin to notice patterns others miss. You connect ideas in new ways. You take what seems unrelated and merge it into something powerful. This is how innovation works. It's not always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's a quiet shift in how you look at things, a different question, a deeper insight, a willingness to be misunderstood for the sake of staying true to a bigger vision. And yes, it takes courage to think this way. It takes courage to not follow the crowd, to go against the grain, to walk into a room full of people who see one thing and you see something entirely different. But that courage pays off, because when you stop thinking like everyone else, you stop competing with them. You create your own lane, you carve your own path, and that's where the magic happens, not in comparison, not in conformity, but in creativity. The truth is, every problem is a portal. Every limitation is an opening, but only those with the eyes to see it can walk through. And you develop that vision not by memorizing more information, but by elevating the way you think, by asking, what's another way to see this? What's the opportunity hidden in this challenge? What's possible here that I haven't considered yet? Those are the questions that open doors. Questions rooted in curiosity, not fear. When you think differently, your world begins to reshape itself around your boldness. Solutions show up, people show up. Unexpected wins appear, not by accident, as a response to the frequency you're operating from. Because innovative thinking doesn't just attract opportunity, it creates it. It turns the invisible into the visible, transforms obstacles into tools and doubt into direction. And the more you practice it, the more natural it becomes. You start to live not by reaction, but by design. Stop seeing your circumstances as final and start treating them as flexible. And that's how you begin to rise, by thinking in a way that others don't, acting in a way that aligns with what you know is possible. Every great transformation begins in the mind. Long before you see the change on the outside, something has to shift on the inside. A new belief must take root. A new perspective must be born. That's the true beginning, not the moment the world notices, but the moment you decide to think differently. That quiet, powerful decision to challenge everything you've known, everything you've believed, everything you've accepted as just the way it is. Because once you change how you think, the way you move, act, and life follows. That's why thinking differently isn't just about being clever or creative. It's the first and most vital step in becoming the person you were always meant to be. You don't just wake up one day and become your highest self. You grow into that version of you by gradually letting go of the thoughts that no longer serve you and choosing new ones that align with your vision. But most people never take this step. They live on autopilot, repeating cycles that no longer match who they're becoming. They feel stuck, not because they aren't capable, but because their thinking hasn't caught up with their potential. That's the trap. That's the silent weight holding them back. It's not the world outside them, it's the stories inside them. To think differently is to break those stories open, to look at the beliefs you've carried, some for years, some inherited, some absorbed unconsciously, and ask, is this the only way to see things? What if there's more? That question alone is powerful. It interrupts the pattern. It gives you space. It invites in new thoughts and with them a new identity. Because your identity is not fixed. It's fluid. And every time you think in a new way, you give yourself permission to become someone new, someone wiser, freer, more aligned with your purpose. Transformation doesn't begin with action. It begins with awareness. When you become aware of the limitations in your thinking, you also become aware of your power to rise above them. You start catching yourself in those moments when fear wants to take over, when old habits whisper you back into safety, when doubt tries to slow your momentum. And instead of reacting like you always have, you pause. You choose again. That's the power of thinking differently. It creates space between the old and the new. And in that space, transformation is born. You'll start to notice that the more you shift your thinking, the more the world around you shifts too. People respond differently. Doors open. You attract conversations, ideas, and opportunities that align with the version of you that's now leading your life. It may feel subtle at first, like a small change in your daily routine, a different choice of words, a decision you would have avoided before. But those small changes, repeated consistently, build new neural pathways. And those pathways form a new mindset. And that mindset becomes your new baseline, the foundation of the future you're building. Don't wait for some grand event to signal the start of your transformation. It starts the moment you choose to see things differently. It starts when you stop playing small in your mind. Stop seeing yourself through the lens of past failures and start seeing yourself through the lens of growth and possibility. You choose to believe that just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't happen. That shift alone can change everything. Thinking differently also means becoming more emotionally intelligent. You begin to observe your emotional responses and realize that not every thought deserves your energy. Not every fear needs to be entertained. You gain clarity not by having all the answers, but by asking better questions. And in doing so, you begin to lead yourself. That's the real goal, to become someone who no longer needs external permission to grow, to act, to evolve, someone who lives from the inside out. It's a powerful place to live when your transformation starts from the mind, becomes real, sustainable, and unshakable. Because no matter what happens around you, you have the tools to adapt, to rise, to reinvent. You are no longer held hostage by your past, guided by your vision. You stop being a product of your circumstances and become a product of your choices. And that's when everything begins to change, not by force, but by alignment, not by luck, but by intention, not by waiting, but by thinking differently and acting from that higher space every single day. When you begin to think differently, everything in your life starts to shift. Your perspective deepens, your energy elevates, and the boundaries you once lived within begin to dissolve. You stop accepting limitations as truth and start questioning the stories that have kept you small. You realize that your comfort zone isn't safety, it's stagnation. That your mind, when left on autopilot, will lead you in circles. But the moment you take control of your thinking, unlock the power to reshape your entire reality. Transformation isn't something that happens to a select few. It begins the moment someone dares to challenge the way they see the world. The moment you stop waiting for the world to change and instead decide to change how you think about the world. Every belief you upgrade, every pattern you break, every time you choose growth over fear, you're creating a new path forward. A path that aligns with your purpose, your potential, and the truth of who you really are. Because in the end, thinking differently isn't just a mindset. It's a way of life, a way of rising above limitation, of designing your future with clarity, and of living not by chance but by choice. That's the beginning of freedom. That's the beginning of everything.